Hey everybody, I'm Zach,
And I'm Jesse.
and you're watching In Depth on Now You Know. Tesla domination, Jesse.
Yes.
Let's take a look at some of these numbers because I don't think that most people are understanding what is going on out there in the car world.
Right.
The Model 3 is completely dominating the U.S. car market. And it's pretty much only the U.S. car market at the moment because we're shipping very few to Canada and none anywhere else.
Right.
So let's take a look at this here. This looks like a Pac-Man. Do you remember Pac-Man, Jesse?
Yep.
That
I mean, I don't remember it, but I know of it.
I used to play Pac-Man, and this looks like a little Pac-Man eating all the rest of the little teeny cars that are left. So what we see here in dark blue is the Model 3, and then we've got the Model S and X. So when you're done, it's just a teeny sliver of the car market left. So 87.7% of the EV car market share in the U.S. went to Tesla.
Wow. That's about 90%.
Yeah. I mean, 17,800 Model 3s in August. Kind of crazy if you think about it.
That is crazy. It's the most ever.
Yeah, I mean, just to give this some perspective here, 55,882 year-to-date sales of the Model 3. So you might be saying, like, I don't really know what that means. Well, let's look at the Nissan Leaf, which is the biggest selling EV up to this point. It sold 30,200 cars in 2014. That was a record for it. And as you can see here, the Model 3 just blew that out of the water. In fact, the only other EV that came close to selling 17,800 cars in a month was
The Model 3.
the Model 3. It beat its own record.
right.
And it's going to continue to beat its own record. And to give you some ideas about EVs in general, August of 2018 marks the 35 month of consecutive year-over-year monthly sales gains for plug-in vehicles. So 35 months of just consecutive EV growth. And I don't see this stopping anytime soon.
Right. And now we're just talking about EV sales, but the Model 3 outsold the Nissan Altima, Sentra, Elantra, Subaru Forester, Dodge Grand Caravan, Mazda CX-5, the Honda Pilot. If it were on the lists, it would have made the 18th position.
And that's, compared to all cars, including pickup trucks and minivans and you name it.
Right. Meanwhile, other ICE sedans on the market are doing pretty poorly.
Yeah, we went through some lists of cars sales in August, and we didn't really cherry pick. We wanted to find comparable cars.
Right.
So for the most part, the cars you're going to see are cars that you would consider buying if you were going to buy the Model 3.
Right.
And so see if you recognize these brands. The BMW 3 Series, it dropped 30% in sales in August, and it dropped 16% in sales year to date. And that's a car that's a $45,000 starting price car. So
Right.
that's even above the Model 3.
Well, at this point, it's about the same price for
That's true.
The least you can spend on a Model 3.
That's true. But the Model 3 is pulling people out of other cars, some that are more expensive, but a lot of cars that are even less expensive.
Right.
And so here's a list here of cars. And as you can see here, these cars had, for the most part, double-digit losses in August. A lot of them had huge losses year to date. So this is partially attributable to a slumped sales market for all automobiles, but it's also attributable to a car that came along and took away sales.
True. And I mean, I want to point out that even in this slump market, Tesla is growing in their sales where everyone else is losing sales. I mean, not just the BMW, we're talking the Mazda 6, the Ford Focus, the Lexus ES, the Volkswagen Passat, the Honda Civic, the Mazda 3, the Toyota Prius family, the Volkswagen Jetta, the Toyota Camry, the Subaru Legacy, the Hyundai Sonata, the Honda Accord, and the Toyota Corolla family.
I mean, these are all recognizable cars.
Right. All cars that you see on the roads, all of their sales are down. I think that the most interesting to me is the Prius. The Prius is going down because, let's face it, if you were thinking of buying a Prius, you either A, wanted to save gas money, or B, you wanted to save the environment. So if you wanted to do any of those two things, there is a much better car to buy, and that is the Model 3. There are just a few cases where you would want to buy the Prius, I think, and that is if you were just like, I need to drive to Saskatchewan and then come back.
You can do that in the Model 3.
You can't do that in the Model 3. I don't know. I'm just like,
There's no real reason that I can think
yeah.
of other than, the starting price is lower. So I can see why you'd buy the Prius in today's market because the starting price is lower at the moment.
True.
And again, this is before the Model 3 gets to its base price.
Exactly.
We're still talking a very expensive.
So many people are waiting for the base price. I can't begin to stress to tell you that. It might not be that exciting because a lot of people might be saying, okay, but it's not number one. Tesla isn't selling number one. I mean,
Yet.
it is selling number one EV car sales, but of course its competition is not that strong.
But it is number one if you look at it a different way. So if you look at the Model 3 as being an expensive car, which it is, and then you do a little bit of math, you'll see that if you rank the sales of cars by revenue, the Model 3 comes out as the number one U.S. passenger car for the month of August, with over $1 billion in revenue. So if you'll take a look at this chart here, you'll see that even though other cars might have beat it in terms of the units sold, because they're not as expensive, the revenue raised from them is far less.
Right.
So as you can see here, in its market, it's the number one in revenue.
Right.
And that means a lot because that's the money coming into a company to continue operations.
Right.
And we already know from Elon and from Tesla that the margin on the Model 3 is just getting better every month.
Right. And with all of these people waiting for the base Model 3, I'm going to conjecture that when it's finally time for them to buy their base Model 3, they're going to say to themselves, I've waited an extra 3 months that I had originally planned. I was able to save up a little bit more, maybe for a bigger down payment, or maybe now I just have more money. Am I going to go up to the long-range battery? Am I going to, maybe get a nicer color, the nicer wheels? Am I going to do something else? Stuff that, right now they can't think about because it's not right in front of them.
Right.
It's not as enticing right now to think that, okay, this car is, and I know because that's the way I'm feeling right now. I'm just like, I'm just going to get the base Model 3. But part of me knows that when it is time for me to choose, am I going to go for the car that is, going to make Tesla a bigger profit? I don't know.
I want to also point this out. Most news agencies don't cover the fact that Tesla is selling well. Why? Because Tesla doesn't release monthly sales figures. And in fact, GM just announced they're going to be starting to release just quarterly sales figures. And that could be because they know that they're going to be having to go head-to-head with Tesla. But here's the problem. Because Tesla doesn't release monthly sales figures, big news organizations like Reuters or the AP aren't going to report it because there's no official number. So even though we know pretty closely how many cars they've sold, it's not an official number.
Right.
And if you're a news organization, you usually don't feel comfortable releasing it. So we rely on like Inside EVs for their numbers, and they're generally very correct. And then they go back and recorrect them as the figures come out. But we only hear from Tesla every quarter.
Right.
So here's an open letter to Elon from one of our viewers, and let's just see what he says. Dear Elon and Tesla PR staff, please have your staff begin releasing monthly U.S. sales data so that Tesla models all appear on U.S. top-selling vehicles lists that get promoted everywhere. The Model 3 is now in the top 20 list of U.S. vehicle sales at about number 18 for July of 2018. But Tesla is absent Reuters' list only because Tesla doesn't release U.S. sales numbers. That is what Reuters staff told me after my email query. Reuters claims they can't trust Inside EV's figures, and Tesla doesn't release figures, enabling them to deny Model 3 is a top 20 selling vehicle in the US. It is extremely important for these news agencies to be required to post Model 3 progress, as well as progress for the Model S and X, and future Model Y, Semi, Pickup. Can't wait for those. Please fix this so that ICE buyers see that there is a new car type in town to choose from that is killing ICE sales. If Tesla fails to make this change, then Reuters and all other outlets that quote Reuters, like Yahoo, etc., get to pretend that EVs don't exist. Model 3 is a US top 20 vehicle now. Please force auto lists to acknowledge this fact. Keep up the great work, Elon and Tesla employees both. We appreciate your efforts, and you're enduring the big oil and shorts antics. Your efforts are greatly appreciated. Ross. I think this is super important. I think that Elon and company have to change their policy and start listing sales data for the month.
Right. And I think that it was smart for them to keep it quarterly during the Model 3 ramp because everyone needed to know the number. It was so important, and now it just doesn't seem quite as important. A lot of people still care. But, now that Model 3 production is more stable, I think that there's no downside. I think that there was a clear downside before, because if they came out with a monthly number and it was lower than what the analysts had predicted, then the Tesla stock would drop by 5%, and that would lead to mass chaos and hysteria. But I think at this point, I think monthly sales numbers are only going to help.
Now, as people begin to hear about Model 3s, and for a lot of people, this will be the first time they'll hear of it when they hear it on some list somewhere, right? Reported on like the nightly news. When that happens, I think psychologically something happens, which is like, wait a minute, what is this car and why is it on this list along with these other cars I've heard of?
Right.
And if you think back to things that you started to accept into your life, let's talk about high definition television. That's pretty much most of us watching the show can probably remember that day. There used to be standard television, and then along came high def. And when that happened, it wasn't like everyone threw out their televisions the first day.
Right.
Most people were like, that's just some kind of fad. I'm not wasting my money on a new TV. And they were expensive, and there wasn't a lot of programming in high def, but there were some early adopters, right? And you'd go over to their house, and they'd show off their TV, and you feel like, well, that's kind of cool, but it's still expensive, and maybe I have a lot of good arguments against it. But as more and more people did it, and as you begin to go into stores like Best Buy and see high def TVs everywhere, you begin to feel like, I'm missing out on something here. Mm-hmm. And there came a day when you drove down the street and there was nothing but old televisions on the side of the road.
It's true. It's to this day, it still happens.
Right. But I mean, it takes that shift to take place, and that shift only takes place when enough people are talking about it and when enough people start to realize that this is actually a thing. Mm-hmm. And it is a thing, and if you're watching the show, you know it's a thing, but it's not a thing for the rest of the world yet. We're still at the very beginning of the curve, right, of this S curve that we talk about all the time. So that's why it's so important for you guys to realize that we are dominating, because you can take advantage of this information. How can you take advantage of it?
You could buy Tesla stock.
Yeah, you can buy Tesla stock. You can buy stock in EV companies in general. Mm-hmm. You can also take a look at your portfolio and say to yourself, I've been holding on to Ford for a while and it's dropped 25% this year, and maybe now's the time to get rid of it before it drops more. Because a lot of people are looking at, let's say, Ford stock, and they're going, wow, Ford's under $10 a share. Might pick some of that up. Mm-hmm. Maybe you shouldn't. Because just because a company is cheap right now doesn't mean it's a good value.
Right.
A lot of these companies are not jumping on board the EV bandwagon in a good way, and so they're going to be left behind when this new domination comes.
True.
I just want to point out that VW's Chief Executive Officer, Herbert Diess, has made this comment in an interview for the company's internal newsletter. He said, "The burden for our company, such as the cost of bringing to market electric cars, will be higher than expected. This is particularly so since some of our competitors have been making more progress."
That's pretty harsh. That's pretty... Oof. Let's face it, they did not put the money where it should go. They did not put it into batteries. That is the single smartest move that Tesla did, was to say, we're going to make the biggest battery factory on Earth.
Right.
And we're going to have more battery factories than all EV competitors, and all the competitors are going to have to buy their packs from other companies. You know, those companies sell it for a profit, which means that all of the other EVs are more expensive because they do not have the battery production themselves to be able to build the cars at a price, because you have to buy so many batteries. It's not like engines, where the engine only costs like a couple grand. The batteries are a humongous cost, and you're selling each battery.
That's right.
or packs of batteries. Those have to go for a profit margin, and those are pretty high.
Exactly, and they don't control them.
Right.
And here's the last bit of news. Tesla doesn't just make EVs. Right. They make EVs that are going to be autonomous. Mm-hmm. And so many people leave that last part out because it seems so fantastical. It just seems like, well, that's just a futuristic science fiction thing. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. But that is one of the big keys here. All these other car companies, even if they do make an EV, they're not working on autonomous EVs like Tesla is.
Right.
Now, when you hear a story about autonomous cars, what's the first company you hear of?
Waymo.
They've got the backing of Google. They've been working on it since 2009. And so they've been collecting millions of miles of data, right? In fact, the latest numbers we heard is that they have 8 million miles of data.
Tesla has 9 billion miles of data that they have been collecting. 9 billion with a B. So that is 3 orders of magnitudes higher. About 1,000 times more miles driven than Waymo.
How can that be? I mean, Waymo is working only on this problem.
Because Tesla actually puts out cars that have all of the hardware. So they're able to, even if they aren't driving autonomously, they are able to take all of that data in. And they're able to, and then you have all of this huge, giant databases full of data. When you're like, okay, we've designed a new build for the autopilot. Let's run it through the simulation, which has all of this data that feeds the neural network. It's super useful, and it's something that doesn't get discussed.
Right. And this is given Tesla a huge lead, which, again, most people either don't understand or don't factor into their calculations. So not only is Tesla making the hardware, but they're working on the software, and they've got the data. Like, those are the 3 pieces you need to make this work, and Tesla's got all of them.
Right. Again, and just so that way no one forgets, Tesla sells solar panels. They sell batteries. They are working on all sorts of different technologies.
Yeah.
There's stuff that we haven't even heard of yet, which is, again, one of the most exciting parts about the company, which is that at any moment they can take all of their knowledge, all of their engineers and technological might, and just shift it over to something else.
Yeah, I mean, as we get all of this FUD that comes in for the past few months, we're just so sick of it because Jesse and I are looking at actual numbers, actual sales data, actual things that the company's doing.
Right, they're a growing company.
Right, and when people walk up to us at the water cooler and like, oh, did you hear about Elon? It sounds like he's gone mad. It's like, first of all, it's not true.
Right.
And secondly, has nothing to do with what the company is doing.
The fundamentals of the company, which are doing great.
Right. And so we want to make sure that you keep reminding people that you bump into that this isn't what's going on. This is just the FUD story that's being told to
Right.
everyone. It's not reality. It's just designed to make everyone fearful, to sell their stock, to think about buying stock in Ford or to buying a Ford. And that's not going to help anybody.
No. So just keep in mind, Model 3 is the best-selling EV in the US.
And if you get a chance, go take it for a test drive. You will not be sorry you did.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Now you know.